Good afternoon. We are Team ACRONYM, and we will be presenting on sustainable certification for the Roundtable on Sustainable Palm Oil and increasing legitimacy and transparency in their certifications. We will be going over the challenges faced specifically in West Kalimantan, the current shortcomings of our SPO guidelines, our approach, budget, and projected impact outcomes. The main issues that we as RSPO have identified is that sustainability in palm oil is being seen as a myth. There is a lack of reliable universal palm oil sustainability certification guidelines. And as a globally recognized and trusted body, we must spearhead efforts to create these guidelines. The current ones have been found to not be effective when measured against non-certified plantations. Also, violations of land rights have disproportionately impacted indigenous populations in Western Kalimantan. And we have identified that there is a serious disconnect between the global RSPO body and the Indonesian government established ISPO body. So Western Kalimantan is an epicenter of devastating impacts of deforestation. It has undergone some of the most rapid palm oil expansion over the last decade. However, their human development index is the lowest of the 4 Kalimantan regions. Clearly, the economic benefits are not reaching the local communities. Also, RSPO certification frameworks have been found not to increase poverty reduction in local communities and also increasing healthcare. They have also not had noticeable impacts on decreasing deforestation or fire prevention, which are integral to preventing climate change and carbon emissions. And there's not been an increased noticeable difference in wildlife protection, specifically for the orangutan populations in Western Kalimantan.
So these issues have a huge impact on the indigenous communities. In terms of the environment, their forests are being destroyed, their landscape are being destroyed, and the forest fires is causing smoke, which is making them ill. There is climate change, and also there have been over 1,000 land conflict between 2017 and 2018. On the social / labor impact, there is destruction of the materials they use to make traditional commodities. Usually they sell these commodities for revenue, and the women especially are experiencing distinct losses in passing on intergenerational knowledge and skills. And lastly, there are loss of identity / local culture. Next slide. So we acknowledge that there are different ethnic groups in West Kalimantan, but not all of them are affected equally. As we can see here, the Dayak ethnic are 30.93% of the population, followed by the Malays and the Javanese. So these main ethnic groups are affected mostly by these issues.
So when it comes at looking at some of the shortcomings that RSPO has noticed in terms of smallholder plantations, we've noticed that even though 40% of all smallholder farms are owned by, that all of the palm oil plantations are owned by smallholder farms, less than 1% of independent smallholder farms actually have the certification. And the numbers are only getting worse. From 2016 to 2017, we saw a 38% decrease of certified independent smallholders, which means that these people weren't necessarily lacking anything particular because they had expired licenses. They had the sustainability, they had the capability, they had the want to operate under the certified system. But what stopped them from renewing their licenses was simply all the opportunities that they were facing. A lack of information, a lack of bargaining power, training, external support. Over time, this eats into profit margins. And when it becomes less profitable to operate as a certified service, people tend to look at the black market, where they are prone to being abused by exploitative middlemen, other certification bodies, and maybe uninformed mistakes that they might make because it might be their first time wanting to create a smallholder farm. So we here at RSPO believe that we could help them out with this based off the solutions that we have in the next few slides.
Another serious shortcoming to consider that we aim to rectify is the lack of trust in the credibility of certification itself. The certification of an RSPO certified product actually has to have value to it. And a recent comprehensive study of the first of its kind released by the Center on Environmental Excellence Decisions has found that RSPO certified plantations in specifically Western Kalimantan have not performed measurably better, specifically in terms of sustainability and social impact on local communities. And many of these plantations labeled as sustainable are simply operating on previously deforested land, which was not done sustainably. And there is not a universal and clearly defined definition of what sustainability is set forth by the SPO, creating a lot of gray area, which leads to corruption. And currently, there is a serious gap between the Indonesian-operated ISPO and the Intergovernmental RSPO organization. The two are seen to undermine each other despite having mutual aims. So we aim to create a formalized Indonesian chapter for RSPO, which will be populated by Indonesian government workers in order to create a more formalized relationship and have specific guidelines for the global community to see in terms of this relationship.
As my colleague mentioned earlier, the local people is not that they don't care about environmental concern, but most of the time they lack information. And as part of our solution, we want to provide training courses based on revised indigenous feedback to help them ensure involved in sustainable productivity. Also, we plan to allocate funding to train or educate indigenous people in our certification process so they can reduce the dependency on external sources to help them. We also want to provide an incentive to smallholder farmers to join our certification program by connecting them to international buyers and expand their market network to help their livelihood. Also, we plan to promote local authority and positive psychological impact by allowing them to take part in decision-making body in terms of developing guidelines in our certification process.
Yes, as you can see, the slides speak for itself, but you might be wondering why 500,000 for training and certification. But that's because this is where our main focus is. We believe for this solution to happen, we really have to train and really educate the indigenous community. So that's why we allocated this much money in there. And as you can see, we also have $3,000 for salaries because we want to create jobs to get people out of poverty and give them jobs basically.
So most importantly here is that we want to help the smallholders in whatever way possible. So in the 1 year that we have, with the budget that we have allocated as well, we want to try this out specifically in West Kalimantan, this whole certification trial. Now, typically to get a certificate, it takes a 5-year lengthy period. But we believe that for this specific trial, we could have it on a rolling basis. If a new smallholder decides that they want to get a certification now, through this process, they can. And this is simply done through reverting local control of certifications to the governments themselves. So West Kalimantan would have the authority granted by us to determine whether or not a place qualifies for certification. But we believe in a system of trust but verify. So the important thing is that these RSPO approved indigenous inspectors from the community, the people who've actually lived here instead of us RSPO folks who may have only visited a few times. These people know the community stakeholders and can restructure some guidelines around certain aspects that we just might not be aware about right now. Just taking a look at ISH standards, they would be able to work around them, add some malleability to it all. Next slide, please. Now, real briefly, here we have a visual explanation of everything we've gone through. I'm not going to get through it all, but this is basically all that we've talked about, the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 step of having the inspector, having the local government provide certification, having the inspector review it, having the local community potentially put an appeal if they disagree with both the inspector and with the government, granting certification, but then using the benefits of RSPO certification to fight for higher wages and fight for better conditions and better resources for these people. Final slide, please. So overall, what we expect from this project as a whole is not only will people be working within the certified system, but it will ultimately come to their benefit. There is no more race to the bottom when it comes to wages. The data that we could find could be replicable throughout the entire Kalimantan region. We expect higher profits through the partnerships that we could help provide due to the leeway that we're granting here. And we could also get data different demographics to see if certain genders or certain indigenous groups face more difficulties as either inspectors or smallholder farm owners. But overall, we just expect higher rates of certification and a good set plan of action. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Team ACRONYM. That was perfect timing. Great work. I'm starting your 5 minutes of judges questioning now.
I'm wondering, thank you for your presentation. I'm wondering, you're proposing a more formalized relationship between ISPO and RSPO. What are you thinking about? What do you think are the risks of that more formalized relationship, and how are you thinking about mitigating those risks?
I definitely foresee one of the risks being having to adhere to more lax standards and sort of bureaucracy and potential government corruption. Because ISPO has been found to be internally contradicting within their own policies. What we're trying to establish here is to not really adhere to any ISPO standards. ISPO has their own very clear standard. They are an international organization. So we would like to formally include Indonesian ISPO workers in an outreach chapter to our organization, so we have clear communications between the two bodies. But in terms of creating standards, they will never be based on ISPO standards, but our own adherence, because it is ultimately our RSPO label that goes under the certification.
I wanted just to let you guys know there's actually a model for that. You may not even know that, but oftentimes with international standard bodies, they make country specific standards as well. So there's a standard called a global agricultural practice, and then each country has its own standardization body as well. So Kenya, global agricultural practice. So just FYI, that's a great model. Can you talk to me about the $1 million budget? Is that just for year one? Or is that going to be a year-on-year cost? And where do you propose coming up with that additional $1 million every year, assuming that's how it's going to work?
Yeah.
Shaffiou, do you want to?
Yes. So yeah, I believe that's for year one budget that we proposed, because we're planning to have everything year over year and see how things go, and based on the result that we have, and see how we can move on to the next step. But Max can give additional information on that.
Yes, just real briefly. So this is the sort of adaptive budget that we have in mind, but the key emphasis is on adaptive. Nothing is necessarily set in stone. If certification empowerment requires less money, we could hand it off to logistics. But we basically want to see what operates and what works. If we have to modify the budget based off good findings that we find for the first year, we are always open to do so. In terms of getting more money, more funding future on, there are some NGOs within the region, and there is the CPO fund available for anything involving oil. It can be used specifically, but for anything else involving training, logistics, transportation, that fund could be used to help replenish some of the funds that we go through.
So could you also repeat, so you mentioned incentives to smallholders to join the certification process. So what sort of incentives what are you thinking about?
Yeah, so operating within the system, as it currently stands, it's not a very attractive idea, which is why we see less than 1% of people actually doing it. But through the certification process, there have been previous models of collective farm bargaining, where people as a community decide to operate as a whole within the region. So when a multinational corporation or a black market then decides, like, hey, we want to give you the cheapest offer that we can, because if you don't take it, your neighbor will. So with RSPO, if we have these certified locations, we could help them essentially work together to get to know each other, to ask for these rates, because sometimes people think the worst of their neighbors. They don't know exactly what offer they're getting from each other. But if we could provide that linkage institution just by the basis of supply and demand, they might be able to get a higher offer altogether. And we could help supplement some of the expenses with some of the money that we put in the budget.
If there are no other questions, you guys are just right about out of time for your 5-minute questioning. So great work, Team Acronym. Thank you guys so much for your presentation.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you. Good job.
Thank you so much. Thanks.
Thank you.